All right, and we are live. How's everybody doing today? I hope everybody's doing good. Welcome back. Waiting for everybody to filter on in. What's up? What's up, everybody? Good days. Hope everybody's having a good Tuesday. I'm just going to wait for people to file on in. Hopefully everybody's doing good today. We've got a few things to talk about. We have some updates on the front line, some like what's next sort of after Avdiivka. And then we have some news things that we're going to talk about maybe Navalny, the Russian opposition candidate who was in prison, who has died. So we might talk about that. We might also talk about the Ukrainian or the Russian pilot who defected, who was also killed. So got some stuff to talk about today. But without further ado, I guess I'll just hop right into it. Head over to the map. Biggest news so far today is that Krinky, I have not updated the map. I was showing that they had about this much left. I'll update it right now. It's not super important, but basically Krinky, messed up. Krinky is done. So we're going to level out the front. The Ukrainians have pulled back from here. Long overdue. Was not benefiting them at all. Was actually costing them a lot. A lot of manpower, a lot of small boats and stuff are being lost trying to keep this supplied. So good decision. Came months and months late. Syrskyi had to do it because Zaluzhny didn't want to do it. So now Kherson, there is probably still a small Ukrainian presence in these in this swampy area, sort of. But in terms of actually on solid land, no Ukrainian presence. And this whole area looks completely different because of the fact that the Novakarkovka Dam is no longer in existence. So, this isn't a big reservoir up here anymore, like it used to be. So this map does not actually represent how the river looks. It flows along a different path now. Everything is a little bit different down here. So just so you guys understand. But now I believe what should happen, what the Russians should do is now begin doing the same sort of operation that the Ukrainians had and start making Kherson become a big drain for the Ukrainians. It already is a big drain. Having this city trying to keep it supplied is not particularly beneficial for the Ukrainians. The Russian artillery and stuff is pretty safe back here. Sometimes it gets targeted, but for the most part, the Russians can watch the approaches into Kherson with drones. They have deep strike capability. This was not necessarily a win for the Ukrainians. When the Russians had their bridgehead out like this, and it came up here like this, something like that. It wasn't exactly like that, but you get the idea. When Kherson looked like this, the Ukrainians had the Russians in a very difficult position, right? They had to keep the Russians had to keep themselves supplied over the one of two bridges in the Artyomovsk bridge, or I'm sorry, the I can't remember the name, RT something bridge in Kherson was hit with HIMARS and was put out of action. They had small floating bridges going across, but nothing to really, I mean, it's hard to keep this large of a bridgehead open. I don't think the Ukrainians should have targeted this. I believe that they should have kept wearing the Russians down on this side until they built up enough force concentration and then took out the bridge. And, then you have an army that's trapped. Instead, what they did was they destroyed the bridge over months, and then the Russians ended up withdrawing and just really, it didn't benefit them moving into Kherson at all, outside of PR, right? PR, it helped them, but they lost men and material on their way in. They did not destroy a Russian army because the Russian army had already left the side of the bank. And it just didn't work out for the Ukrainians really particularly well. So if the Russians were looking to wear out the Ukrainians even more, having some sort of required force being stationed over here and not just have a safe boundary on the river could very much benefit the Russians, who are, currently benefiting from a greater amount of resources in terms of manpower. So they can expend manpower more aggressively and force the Ukrainians to expend their manpower non-efficiently. So down here in Kherson, up here in Zaporizhzhia, which we'll talk about in a second, and then just all across the front. But moving on to the next progress, I don't know if I showed you guys this. I don't know how much of this was in my last video, but the Russians have pushed up into this defensive line. I do believe I showed you this one. And we have an update over here south of Robotny, where the Russians have taken the fortification south of the town and have also been geolocated to this area right here on the westernmost edge of the town. So the Russians are applying a lot of pressure. Most of this town is likely in the gray zone, with Ukrainian positions being over here, more or less. Ukrainian positions in this area will likely fall in the coming days, just because they're now in a very difficult position, if this is even occupied by the Ukrainians or if it's just gray zone, which these two little salients right here might just be gray zone, and the pocket could actually be a lot smaller for the Ukrainians. We'll see. A lot of people were talking about this being a very big offensive. I'm always very cautious because I've heard hundreds of stories over the last 2 years about massive Russian offensives coming from this direction, coming from that direction. So I'm always just a sort of a wait and see sort of guy. The Russians have pushed into this area, but they're not committing a large number of troops for these actions. This isn't some grand offensive. It's not really moving slow. Again, this is just what I would consider positional combat, prepping the stage for a possible offensive on Kharkiv or something like that. But really, this is nothing significant. They're just recapturing the defensive positions that they lost during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and really reversing these gains and just kind of flattening the front line right here. If there is an advance here, you'll know. There'll be a much larger force commitment, and then there'll be either it'll be stopped and you'll notice it because it'll look something like what happened to the Ukrainians when they got piled up, or they'll be more successful and actually make progress. But for right now, I would just consider this positional combat. The Russians just reasserting themselves in Zaporizhzhia and forcing reserves to be committed here to try to hold Robotny, which is just not what the Ukrainians want to be doing with their reserves right now. So again, the Russians just stretching the Ukrainians all over the place. But there is reports of a large troop concentration just south of this area. So we could definitely see offensive operations in this sector eventually. Or should I say more aggressive offensive operations in this area eventually. Now moving over to the southern Donetsk front. We have an update, and that is that the small town of Pabyeta, the small village, it's not a town, it's like almost like a farm town, a very small town. It has nothing to do with the actual village itself, was captured by the Russians. This is another Ukrainian strong point. It runs along the 00532. And if you guys have been listening to me for this week or the past week, I've talked about this town multiple times. It's kind of one of the keys to this southern Donetsk region. It's a strong fortification that was on sort of this Marinka line, right? So this is one of the areas that has been prepped for hostilities for 8 years. So capturing this is a big deal. Not so much the town. The town means nothing. It's all gone. All these buildings are gone. What matters is the fortification system that was around this town, defending this stretch of highway. Now you look what's behind Pabieta is almost nothing, right? So the Ukrainians do have positions in here, but there's no solid logistics into this area. You have to go through fields, through dirt roads, perhaps. I mean, I don't even really see many dirt roads. Yeah, this is like just on the side of a field. So you have your one road that goes into Marinka right here that you can see or runs along down here. Yeah, you have this one road. This is probably lightly paved, so like gravel. And then this is a paved road over here. This is a paved road, but really there's just this big space back here. And now I'm going to actually take you guys over to the. Okay. Is there something going on with my microphone or anything? I just came back to the chat and I see people talking about it. I hope nothing's going wrong. Let me take you guys over to. Hold on. Let me take you over to the topographical map, which once again, if you guys want to use this as a resource, it is a good resource to use. Topographical map, all you have to go do is type it in on Google and you can see. So right here, I'm going to zoom out just so you can see. It's going to kind of give you a weird impression of the region. So here's Pabieta, right? This is Marinka right here. This is where the front line was for a long time. So you have the Russians now capturing Pabieta, and you can see why Pabieta is important to this terrain, right? All of these settlements. So here's Novomihailovka, here's Konstantinivka, here is I can't remember its name. Starts with a P, I think, or T. But anyway, you can see how Pabieta is positioned on this high ground up here, right? It's not very much high ground, but it's this little bit of high ground. And the Russians are now going to be positioned on this high ground with the ability, if they expand out from here, with the ability to fire down upon these settlements with ATGMs and mortars and stuff like that. This is just not a lot of these urban developments, and you can see it up here too, are in these valleys along these creeks, basically along these little rivers. So the Russians are always constantly moving through the middle, coming down over the top, and then capturing them. And then so that's what they did with Pabieta, and that's what they're going to eventually end up. This allows a lot more Russian pressure upon Novomihailovka from the north and upon these other settlements. And then once these settlements are captured, then the road to Ugledar is open, and supply to Ugledar becomes much more difficult. So it's all you can always tell the Russian plan based off of the topographical maps. Back over to the map. I had some more areas that I wanted to talk about real fast before we finish up. Let's see. So here we have Avdeevka. I've updated the map. We do have reports that the Russians have pushed into this little town right here of Lashtokany. They are the Ukrainians are still defending this territory. They're not giving up these outer towns without a fight. And the Russians right here are kind of still cleaning out Avdiivka. Everything was mined in the city. They're still dealing with, there were still Ukrainians in basements and stuff up until probably yesterday or the day before. And now there's a rotation process going on, a little bit of breath. And then I expect these settlements to start being pressured pretty heavily. But, the Russians are also pushing down here in around the Robotny sector, and then up here around Ivanivsky. Obviously, we had this Russian gain, which puts a lot of pressure on the town. So again, another hot spot for the Ukrainians. And then when you come up here to Sinkivka, this area has been really becoming more and more critical for the Ukrainians every day. There's not a ton of movement on the front line, but just the reporting coming out of this region is not good. We have reports that the field commanders in this region have left Kupiansk. So the highest ranking officials that are in the field have now, or leadership in the field has now left Kupiansk, and that happened directly after Zelensky's visit. And I'd just like to remind you guys, Zelensky, in his most recent visits, he visited Severodonetsk, he then visited Bakhmut, he then visited Avdiivka, and Robotny. So these, I mean, you can kind of see the pattern here of where he goes, what ends up happening. Obviously, Robotny is now in the squisher. It's like the Ukrainians have information about where the Russians are going, and Zelensky has to go to these places and reaffirm his leadership and, you know, make a statement about going to these places. So he just visited Kupiansk, and now the rumors are that there is going to be a pretty big Russian push up in this northern sector to try to cut off this road and put a lot of pressure on this Oskal bridgehead for the Ukrainians. So hot spots everywhere. Things are not getting easier for the Ukrainians after Avdiivka fell. And it's just gonna, I would say these two areas, this southern Donetsk region right here is the one to watch. I think that the Russians are really going to try to start to exploit the Novomikhailivka, Konstantinivka, Pabyeta area right here, and put a lot of pressure on Ugledar. And then up in the north, in Kupiansk. Anything that you see over here, and you know, this is just my opinion. I don't think that Orikhiv is really a very very important strategic goal right now. So anything you're going to see over here, I think, is just more or less positional battles to better enhance the Russian positions, as well as force reserve rotation. So back over to our page. Yeah, he didn't visit anywhere. It's a green screen, sure, but if he's saying he's visiting places, then it still has the same effect, right? He still has to go to these places. He's trying to visit them to make sure that he's still large and in charge. So if you guys want to go ahead and get questions in right now, you can go ahead and get questions in. I'm going to take us over to my Twitter real fast and so just show you guys a couple of things on the Twitter. Here's a video of the Taus rocket artillery system, thermobaric rocket artillery system, absolutely hammering Pabyeta. I'll make it bigger for you guys. Usually this is the kind of stuff that gets my videos demonetized, but whatever. I don't care today. Not so important. I'd rather you guys see this because this is the kind of situation that the Ukrainians are dealing with. I mean, literally this stuff, like the overpressure from this stuff will pop your organs. So that's a lot of damage. That's a lot of fire support on one tiny little village. And it's likely why the Russians were able to move in and capture it after fighting for so long. And here you have the Russian flags being raised in Krinky.
Развалины противника удовлетворены. Где мы? Там победа.
I mean, look at what's left of Krinky. Can you believe that the Ukrainians were even sitting here? There's like nothing even to hide behind. It's a wasteland. But yeah, so that's also what's going on. And that's it for what I wanted to show you. The news has been very dry as of late. We've been kind of in a sort of a slump. There's a lot of operational security going on in the Robotny area in Zaporizhzhia, as well as up in the north. So we're just not seeing a lot of like battlefield updates and not a lot of reports coming out because the Russians actually kind of value OPSEC. So it's important. All right. Questions. Do you think that attacks on Donetsk will be reduced after the Russian takeover of Avdiivka? Once again, greetings from Denmark. Hello to everybody in Denmark and to you specifically. I don't think that they're going to necessarily stop shelling Donetsk. They're still within range. I think that this is just a step of moving them back, and it really makes it more difficult for them to do it. I think that what's really going to stop the Ukrainians from shelling Donetsk is when they end up running out of shells to shell Donetsk with. I think that that's basically because they still have HIMARS. They can still continue to strike. They're going to keep doing it. They haven't stopped so far. They just did it again, but we'll see. How many people displaced from these ruined villages and towns? So most of them, like this is another propaganda thing that you have to sort of overcome mentally. I'll take us over to the map. So like most of these villages, like Robitny, since it's been on the front line so long, nobody is in this town. Nobody is in any of these little villages. They've already all been, I guess, displaced, you would say. But I mean, it's like a couple hundred people, for each like section of the front. Like there's not that many people in these towns, right? There wasn't that many people before the war. There's not that many people after. They're mostly like, it's like if you were to go through small towns in Kansas and kind of evacuate people. I mean, it's not like a massive displacement. It's still not great, but a lot of these towns, like Avdiivka, had very, very, very few people left in it. There were like a couple that were waiting for the Russians, I guess, which I cannot believe that the Ukrainians let them stay in the town like that. I mean, I guess it's hard to remove people from their homes, but it's wild that there were still like people just sitting like, hey, welcome, after hundreds of fabs have been falling on the town for days and stuff like that. It's just kind of wild. But most of these places are completely devoid of civilian life, which is why the casualties have been so low. You got to remember, this place has been in a civil war for like 10 years. So, especially around Donetsk front up here, some of the new gains, like there's more people in these areas just because they haven't been subject to the war the entire time. But for the most part, the front line for like 30 to 40 kilometers in each direction had been basically taken over by the military and was not being, there weren't a lot of civilians, right? There's civilians in Donetsk, obviously, there's civilians everywhere, but the reason why the casualties have been so low is because the front line has been pretty stable. Hasn't been like a lot of breakthroughs. The Russians have not gotten back into a lot of civilian territory. Not saying that they're going to like kill civilians or anything, but anytime fighting gets close to civilian areas, civilians get put at risk. So, there aren't a lot of civilians in these front line towns. Like there's not civilians in Ugledar. Like that's just not there. There's not civilians in Novomihailovka, so there's no displacement normally. I mean, you could say like a very, 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 very small percentage maybe, but nothing that would like constitute a major crisis. Don't your kidneys hurt from all those salty NAFO tears? Yeah, bro, I have to detox constantly because my sodium levels get too high, my blood pressure gets all out of whack. It's a nightmare. I have blood pressure medication that I take for that exact reason. Question: how important is Izium? Are the Russians going to try to conquer it again? Yes, probably. For the latter part of that question, they will try to take it again. In terms of how important it is, if you control the entire northern flank and you control Izium, that's the road down to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and then back behind Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, right? So it is important. Can the Russians pressure it without it? For sure. All they have to do really is recapture Liman, and then they're close to Slavyansk, and they can potentially approach, or they can approach from the south, Konstantinivka. It's not like necessary, but the Russians will probably want to recapture it, yes. Scott, do you think it's propaganda from Russia to admit friendly fire on a jet fighter? It's weird. So there is definitely blue on blue incidents that occur. The Russian blue on blue system does not appear to be as infallible as the Western one. The United States' blue on blue system seems to be pretty foolproof. Haven't been a lot of accidents, but they also haven't been in a lot of wars like this, so it's hard to tell. But yes, I do believe sometimes that it is propaganda. They say, oh, we shot it down. It was our mistake, this, that, and the other. It can also be an attempt to reduce the escalation factor, because most of these events, if they are Ukrainian air defense, are Patriot missile systems that are being brought to the front. That's a, you know, it's a pretty big deal. A lot of people just it's kind of normal now. It's everybody's desensitized to that, but it's still a big deal in terms of international politics. So there could be a number of things at play there, or it could just be a friendly shoot down, which happens. Honestly, it seems like it happens enough. I think it's more embarrassing for the Russians to admit that than that the United States supplied one of their best air defense systems and the Ukrainians brought it to the front and then snuck up on the Russian aircraft. It seems way more embarrassing to be like, yeah, we shot it down ourselves. So I don't know really how that works, but why are the Russians not trying to encircle Kharkov? Yeah, we can go over to the map and look at that. First off, that they're not in any position to encircle Kharkov. Kharkov is a major metropolitan area, a city of hundreds of thousands of people, millions probably, actually. But I just don't know the exact population, so we'll stick with hundreds of thousands for right now. It's definitely the third biggest city in Ukraine, though, with Kiev and Lvov being first and second. It's a massive metropolitan area. Look at all these roads that go into it. It's different from this region, right? This is the center of things that are happening. It would take a lot of men, a lot of manpower to encircle this city, capture it. It's a huge undertaking. Really, the Russians don't want to fight in any of the big cities, right? These small cities offer a much better battlefield advantage for the Russians. Fighting through Kharkov, it would be just an absolute nightmare. I mean, the first time you saw it, the Russians literally came down the main road and got shot at and kind of stopped and then got stuck and got shot at, got bogged down, and were forced to retreat. It's just not what you want to do, right? If you have millions of men in different army groups and you can attack this, I mean, if you look at the way that the Germans lost so many men fighting the Soviets in Kharkov, like 3 times. This city was fought over 3 times. So it's just not what the Russians want to do right now when they're accomplishing their missions and staying outside of these major metropolitan areas. Is there a large gap between the defensive line the Ukrainians just fell back to after losing Avdiivka and the next line of fortifications? When will large breakthroughs be possible? That we're getting to that point right now. I don't think like I said, I don't think you're going to see a lot of large breakthroughs just until the Ukrainian army is so depleted that the Russians can do so without taking massive casualties, which is on the way, right? I mean, every single time we talk about attrition of the Ukrainians, it's compiling and getting worse and worse and worse. So this defensive line that the Ukrainians just left was the best one in the country. It's a very big deal. It's a significant loss. And there's nothing back behind it that's even close to it. They do have a defensive line around Severne, around some of these places, Stepove. It's how they were able to hold the Russians back on the flanks for so long. But with the collapse in the middle and with the Russians being able to operate out of the coke plant and out of Avdiivka, the 9th district, and stuff like that for logistics, it's going to be hard for the Ukrainians to hold this. Probably back here around Orchitny, a defensive line is going to be developed. But this is part of the problem, right? This is why the Ukrainians are so insistent on fighting in the east, is because there are these major urban conglomerates like Donetsk kind of flows into Avdiivka, which flows into Orlivka, which flows into Toretsk, which flows into New York, which flows into Toretsk, which flows into Konstantinivka, which flows into Druzhkivka, which flows into Slavyansk. It's like one big defendable area that has roads in a land of black mud black dirt that turns into mud twice a year, right? So the Ukrainians, this is why they're so insistent on fighting in this part of the country, is because it's the most defensible part of the country, but it's the furthest logistics for the Ukrainians, shortest for the Russians. It's not a very good setup. But once you get behind it, I mean, look at this. There's just not even a noticeable town in some of these regions back behind Kramatorsk. So this is where they have chosen to defend, and this is where a majority of the war will be fought. Question. What are Ukraine's most fortified cities in the Donetsk region that are under their control? Right here, Donetsk and New York would probably be now the most fortified cities in Ukraine. And again, look how it's just like one long urban nightmare for any attacker, right? The defenders can move in and out as they please. This is just not where you want to fight. So I don't think the Russians are really going to push here. I think they're going to try to flank these two cities right here. Go over, let's see. Question, what do you think the state of Ukraine's air defense systems is are they currently in? Not great. In terms of ammunition is the issue, right? They're running out of ammunition. The U.S. is not going to be able to keep providing Pack 3 or Pack 2 interceptors, which is what the Patriot runs off of. So that I mean, it's getting worse and worse. They're constantly talking about the degradation of their air defense systems. Every time they fire a missile that isn't being replaced, sorry, my mic went out, so. Man. All right. Well, I'm sorry if my mic quality got worse. It switched to a different mic, so. RIP. Oh, well. I'll see if I can get it back up and running in just a second. All right. If you guys have more questions, get them in. Let's see. Sweden gave away Marin weapons, torpedoes, combat boat worth 1 billion. What do you think that'd be used for? I have no idea, man. I haven't even seen this yet. I don't know why anybody's giving anything to Ukraine at this point. It's ridiculous. It's like they've overinvested and now they just have no choice, and it looks very looks like a very bad situation is developing. What were the fortifications in Avdiivka exactly? I haven't seen any signs of fortifications on from the footage so far. Yeah, so I can show you actually. Let me. I'm just going to go over and look for it in my. Okay, it's right here. So I'll show you exactly. First, I'll show you the map. Oh wait, I think yeah. So I'll show you the map. So right here, if you remember, this was the Chebu fortification, which is the ring road. There's the Zenith fortification, which is the air defense facility. And if you look from the top, it doesn't really look like anything, right? You can see some trenches and stuff, but not really like a fortified area. But here, when I take you over to my Twitter right here, I'll show you what the underground. So this is what the inside of the air defense base look like. As you can see, this is a completely underground facility, concrete walls. You have a refrigerator. You can see all of this ammunition. This is what was left, by the way. These are pictures from the Russians. So you can see they had like canned food from weeks, probably water, ammunition, sleeping accommodations. Here was their tech room. This is after everything important had likely been taken out or maybe abandoned because the guys that were actually holding the space, some of them didn't make it out, some of them did. It was kind of a rough retreat. So, but here you can see all their walkie-talkies are charging, all their comms, computers, everything. Probably where they have, reconnaissance footage, where they deal with drones, where whoever's running operations works out of. Here you can see the Azov or the Ukrainian trident with the sword. This is a huge metal door, probably a sliding door, but you can see this long hallway, concrete walls. This is all underground. This is all the stuff you can't see. This is why these areas are so hard to push into. And then you can just see the massive amount of RPGs down here. All of this is ammunition, mortar rounds, anything that the Ukrainians needed is in here, right? So That's sort of what we're looking at in terms of fortifications, and these are all over Avdiivka. This is not just a one-off thing. This is all over the place. You guys don't see hardly any of what makes the the pushing for the Russians so hard. You never see it because it's all underground. A question: do you think that Ukrainian special forces in Africa will have any impact at all? No, no. That's the biggest waste of resources I've ever seen in my entire life. Hunting down Wagner, I guess, which Wagner isn't even like in the combat zone anymore. So, interesting. Do we know how far underground it is? Far enough. I mean, whatever a normal bunker is, probably 10 feet underground to make sure that you don't, even if you get hit by a bomb, it will shake the living hell out of your building, but it won't, kill everybody who's inside. Do the Russians have any weapons that can penetrate underground? Yes. You should just Google penetrators for the Russian armed forces. They have them for the Iskander. They have them for their hypersonics. They have a bunch of different. They have bombs, glide bombs that have penetrating warheads. So yes, they definitely do. Question: why doesn't Russia extend the front line to the Sumy or Chernigov regions to extend Ukraine army and attrit them at a better rate? It's probably just not really worth it, honestly. It's another area that you have to pay attention to. It's probably just not worth it, to be honest. You gotta look at this from the perspective of somebody who's trying to win the war, right? It's just not really a priority to go into, like, Odessa right now is not a priority in winning the war, right? Odessa will come eventually, maybe, if that's part of the plan. But for right now, the war consists of attriting the Ukrainian army in the smallest possible area with the most efficiency possible, right? Losing as few Russian troops as possible. That's what the Russian goal is. So pushing into these new regions while there's a Ukrainian army to defend it is just going to be unnecessary casualties. Okay, I will ban that person if I see them again. Let's see. Question: why is Ugledar an important place? All right, this is a good question. I'll take us over to the map again. Go down here. Ugledar is right here. It is one of the. It's another fortress area, right? So it's been on the front line for a long time. They've turned it into a fortress. There's fortifications all throughout. There's literally tunnels between certain apartment blocks to each other. This whole area is just another gigantic fortification. Same with this mine up here. So once the Russians break through here, there's just not a lot back here to defend. Again, look at all of these open fields. This is when, during the summer, if the Russians can push through places like Ugledar, Novomihailovka, Pobyeta has already happened, Konstantinivka, if they can get into this back area, there's just the ability for these massive Russian armored movements that capture a bunch of territory and sort of route the Ukrainians back. There's a possibility of it. I'm not saying it's going to happen. But that's why Ugledar is important, is because it has just been developed for so long into such a strategic defensive point, and it's kind of along the high ground right here. So it's important. Let's see. How is electricity supplied to the bunkers? Civilian sources? Yeah, the same electricity that runs into the city is just pushed out into that part of the town. Yeah. They probably also have generators, I imagine. I've just never understood how it's a fortress because the actual town proper is so small. It's just they're like, if you look at the approach from the ground, it's just open flat fields, right? There's nothing around it, and these are commie blocks. So there's like high-rise buildings that go 5-6 stories up, and it just gives this unnatural high ground advantage to everybody to anybody in this region. So it kind of locks down this whole southern sector and keeps anybody from pushing in. Same with now this area is just a little bit different, but it's also all mined very heavily. So it is very small, but it's just got so many tall buildings that it offers an advantage. Let's see. Yeah, and there's coal mines around it, so you know you have underground facilities. Ugledar is a mining town, so it offers enough defensive positions for the Ukrainians to make it worth holding on to. Why is Russian aviation only using? How come they don't use massive unguided bombs? Because they can't fly over the frontline cities, right? You still have Stinger threat. You still have like a manpad threat. You still have medium to short range air defense and long range air defense protecting these areas. It's just not worth losing aircraft to bomb like that. The precision guided munitions with the kits are doing plenty. If the Ukrainian air defense ever degrades to that point, you might see bombs being dropped like that, but it's just not worth the aircraft. All right, I think that's where I'm going to end it up right now. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully we get some more news in the coming days. It's a little dry right now, but this is how it goes. You have your floods, and then you have your droughts. So we're in a little bit of a drought, but it's all good. Remember, if I didn't answer your question, you can go on and ask me questions on my Twitter or Instagram DM. I try to get to them as soon as possible. If you ask anybody, I pretty much answer and talk, and I'll have full conversations with you. So other than that, I appreciate everyone. Take care. Have a great day, and be safe, everybody. Goodbye.